thank you for coming this evening, and welcome to this evening's film event. I'm Roger Shannon, Professor of Film and TV in the Department of Media at Edghill, and I'm also the Associate Director for ICE, which is the Institute for Creative Enterprise, which is one of the university's research institutes. And one of ICE's roles is to publicly showcase research undertaken at the university on or about the creative industries. Tonight's event is the first of our autumnal season of discussions, events and get-togethers, and some of them will be on the slideshow above. There's two more coming up, both in November. Tonight's event is related to the work that's been pursued at the university on or about the work of the marvellous Lancastrian Mexican surrealist artist Leonora Carrington, who was born and bred but a few miles away from here in Chorley, Lancashire. This activity over the last couple of years has included initiating and partnering with Tate Liverpool the Leonora Carrington exhibition in 2015, curating film programmes associated with her art, advising the gallery and museum curators on hitherto unfamiliar aspects of her work, and also her prolific output, and organising in 2017 an academic symposium on the centenary of her birth. And we have a book emerging from that symposium next year called Living Legacies. So as we say, re-Lancastrian Leonora is very much a core theme of ICE. It's part of ICE's energetic endeavours and also ICE's robust research approach. We'd like to make more people more aware of the artist Leonora Carrington. We'd like to interpret more the Lancastrian characteristics of her work and also unearth her under-acknowledged associations with film and with filmmakers. Tonight's film, Female Human Animal, directed by Josh Apinagesi, and he sends his apologies, he's not here this evening. He's now joined the ranks of the lecturers and has classes to run which clash with this evening's screening. Josh began filming at Tate Liverpool in 2015, and he wished the following to be known, and I quote, "Edghill University supported our filmmaking ambitions on Female Human Animal right through the entire shoot, with professional advice and with research expertise on its themes and its topics. The support for the film has been incredible. In particular, the opportunity to air at the university's Leonora Carrington Centenary Symposium a rough cut of the film before a large number of academic researchers and specialists on its subject matter, notably female surrealism and Leonora Carrington. This was completely unique, and it fed into our final cut, which is now on national release from October the 3rd. And that's what you will see this evening." And he rounds it off by saying, "A big thanks to Edghill University." Currently, the film is screening around the UK as well as internationally, and early this week it premiered in Mexico, coinciding with the largest exhibition of Leonora Carrington's work called Magical Tales, which is on show at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Monterey. And this is the wonderful catalogue for that exhibition. And if anybody wants to have a look at it at the end, please do, because it's a marvellous publication. Female Human Animal is the second film with Leonora Carrington themes that Edghill University has supported in recent times. The first being the documentary The Lost Surrealist, which aired on BBC last December and which we screened as a nice event earlier this year. Before we screen the film, I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Dr. Laura Markova, who will say a few words by way of introducing the film. And after the film, we will both be in discussion with Dr. Stephen Forser, who joins us today from the University of Birmingham. Laura.
Thank you. I joined the Department of Media several months ago in order to collaborate on the Leonora Carrington research project. And one of the central lines of inquiry of our project is to explore the possible connection between Leonora Carrington's artistic practice and the medium of film, which is a very interesting research problem Since on the one hand, Leonora never claimed employing film as a means of artistic expression, and on the other hand, her artistic identity is defined by multiple creative collaborations with filmmakers like Luis Buñuel and Alejandro Jodorowsky. And in 1973, Leonora art directed the Mexican art horror film Mansion of Madness, while previously she has cameo appearances in two Mexican New Wave films from the 1960s, There Are No Thieves in This Village and The Pure Soul, which are based on short stories by the magic realists Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Carlos Fuentes. And in the first film, Leonora also shares his episode with Buñuel himself, who sarcastically performs as a sermonizing priest. And I guess this film historical background is also the perfect context to mention that we have the intellectual pleasure to welcome Dr. Stephen Forster from the University of Birmingham, where he's leading the Department of Modern Languages. And Stephen Forster has extensively researched and published on the Surrealist and Dada movement, on the poetry of Tristan Tzara, and French avant-garde filmmakers. So Roger Shannon, Professor Shannon will chair the Q&A, and I believe I will join the discussion also as a representative of the female voice. So in this sense, I should mention that the film that we are going to watch tonight borrows its title from the essay, What is a Woman?, that Leonora Carrington wrote in the 1970s. And it clearly states her ecofeminist position and understanding of subjectivity and identity as a hybrid entity, which is constantly in process. And we can observe that the hybrid genre of female human animal between fact and fiction, or docufiction, somehow conceptually corresponds to Carrington's artistic preoccupation with hybridity and destabilizing binary oppositions. As the early scholars on her work, Whitney Chadwick and Susan Suleiman, have argued, she managed to subvert the gendered roles of muse and femme within the surrealist movement itself, which often reproduced patriarchal structures. And contrary to other documentary productions, recent documentaries on Carrington's life, Female Human Animal does not try to narrativize Leonora's biography, but rather to transpose certain themes and motives from her work to contemporary life. Thus, it follows the experiences of Chloe Aridjis, who is a Mexican novelist and was a close friend of Leonora, and that's why she was invited to co-curate the Tate Liverpool exhibition in 2015, and in the film she plays a version of herself. So in this sense, Female Human Animal, to a great extent, problematizes the role of creative women in contemporary life, and somehow makes subtle allusions to the current political context and the Me Too movement, while it also reappropriates and plays with certain surrealist tropes like irrational love, found objects, or found footage of recorded interviews with Carrington. And I should also mention that in a pure surrealist manner, it also presents the sensation of dislocation between Liverpool and London, where it was shot, and the sensation of anachronism between nowadays and the 1980s, due to its very specific pop synth soundtrack and the main sonic theme composed by the iconic OMD. Joshua Pignonesi completely intentionally shot the film on a rare 1980s video camera that reproduces a quite lurid and nostalgic color scheme. And I would also say that the use of video and the mediality of video has allowed him to not simply remediate Leonora Carrington's paintings, but also to integrate them organically into the visual texture of his work. And without any further attempts to pre-design your aesthetic experience, once again, thank you for being here and enjoy the screening.
But before I ask Laura and Stephen to comment on the film, one of the things that struck me watching it this evening is that there are two main Liverpool locations in the film, Tate, Liverpool, and the Adelphi. And I was thinking that in one place, the Adelphi, which actually looks like an art gallery now, some kind of classical art gallery, that's the place where Leonora Carrington's father, who was a textile millionaire, would have been trading his business. And Tate Liverpool is a gallery where Leonora Carrington's work was recently traded in an exhibition. It was just an interesting corollary of two main Liverpool landmarks. And the second thing that struck me was about Josh Josh Appican-Nagasi's directing approach, which is that, for example, a scene where she does the fatal blow on his head. It's a really great example of the phrase, the budget is the aesthetic, because the film was made on a low budget. And that scene where the camera pans to the side and then and when the camera's panned to the side, you hear a thud, and then the camera pans back and you see Chloe Aridjis make her escape. That's just a great example of that phrase, the budget is the aesthetic. It just works sublimely, but it's obviously made in a sense using very low production values. Anyway, those are my two sort of observations from today. But I wanted to ask Stephen and Laura to maybe comment on two approaches in the film that are very sort of pertinent and relevant. The first is that the way that hybridity is reaffirmed in the film, when we've got non-realism, we've got realism, we've got a person we know is a real person playing herself. We've got fantasy, we've got realism, we've got lots of different types of indeterminate states being discussed. And in a sense, what does that add to our, I suppose, understanding of the relationships that they've written about in the film? The second question is about the form. The shooting on VHS, the 80s synthesizer music. I mean, these are all deliberate decisions that they made creatively. But what do they bring to the film? How do they benefit the film? And how do they bring different sort of meanings to us watching the film? And I guess I'll start with Stephen.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can hear me all right. In a way, I hesitate to say anything because firstly, we've got Leonora Carrington herself cancelling quite firmly against desperate intellectualization in the film, but also because it reminded me of something Jean Cocteau said about his own works and about films generally, or any work of culture, and that's that a work should be difficult to pick up, a work should be difficult to handle and get our hands on. And I think anyone who's seen this film will be faced with that really wonderful and worthwhile challenge of, well, how do I make sense of this? And so I really hesitate to kind of respond in any way. I mean, the most authentic thing for me to do would just be to walk out and get on the train back to Birmingham and leave you to kind of work it out for yourselves. So I'm kind of tempted to do that, but Roger's been kind enough to invite me here and pay for the train ticket, so I feel like I've got to say something. So hybridity in form. Hybridity, it really reminded me of the kind of textbook definition of surrealism. And again, I don't want to kind of overstate a relationship to surrealism and think of that as the main way or the only way in which this film is interesting and valuable. But surrealism means a blending of states. It doesn't mean pure dream at all. It means a blending of states in which dream and reality merge to produce some wonderfully rich, new, ambiguous third state. A key surrealist example of that would be the 1967 Louis Buñuel film Belle de Jour, which, although aesthetically is very different from this film, kind of structurally and in its centering on a female protagonist and her inner life, kind of reminded me of this very much. We get that wonderful blink and you'll miss it reference visually to Trapped in Freedom, that restaurant they go past. That is Belle de Jour in a nutshell. And this film to me seemed to be beautifully kind of poised in that ambiguous sort of mid-zone of, well, is this happening or is this not happening? Is this man kind of just a total manifestation of her imagination? Is he somehow wholly there? Is he partly there? He speaks like a character in one of Freud's case studies, at least to start with. So everyday words become quite quickly meaningless and babbled. So maybe, a very straightforward, obvious word quickly becomes unclear by dint of being repeated. And I think the same thing happens with So, where they're walking around this architecture, this sort of strange, otherwise empty space of columns, which looks like a bit like a de Chirico painting, one of the early surrealist paintings there, of some sort of strange encounter happening in a sort of classical landscape. So it really struck me regarding hybridity as exemplary of that surrealist mid-state. Of course, regarding hybridity, you've also got the human-animal question, which of course is fundamental to the surrealists, but also took surrealism in different directions. And one of the things that seems to me very important about surrealism is to not think of it as one thing. There are various inflections of it, and one of the benefits of the work that's been done in the area of surrealist research, I think over the last maybe 20, 30 years, is firstly to bring out the contribution of women to the surrealist movement, and the contribution of women around the surrealist movement, because Carrington, quite like Frida Kahlo, I think, was sort of kind of very unsure, maybe even hostile to the idea of being branded as a surrealist. But research has opened up the fact that surrealism isn't just about one way of doing surrealism, André Breton's sort of orthodox way, that there are various inflections of it. And we have here a sort of anthropological surrealism for the age of plastic. That was the kind of the feeling I was left with at the end of the film. It's about anthropology, it's about primal human rituals and desires and urges, but in the kind of the modern age of book readings, of authors turning up to kind of trendy London bookshops, of art exhibitions and so on and so forth. So I sort of saw it in relation to that human-animal hybridity that you would associate much less with André Breton actually, and much more with someone like Georges Bataille. So very much into the kind of material, visceral, physical, violent, everyday waking rituals that for Bataille were much more evocative of our unconscious desires, or someone like Michel Leiris, who really promoted this idea of what he called tauromachie. So the idea particularly of a human figure as sort of half bull, half human. And again, you get reference to this in the film. I don't know how much Josh is knowingly playing on these references, but it seems to me absolutely loaded with all sorts of cues and clues and symbols that resonate. And there's definitely at least one Minotaur reference in this as well. Minotaur was the name of a surrealist journal led by this more sort of anthropological brand of surrealists. So I would see hybridity in that sense as well.
So I wonder, Laura, if you could, because you mentioned in your introduction the use of VHS and filming on video, whether you could comment on that, the kind of subversive practices that suggests.
Well, we already had a similar discussion at FACT a few weeks ago, that somehow from a media archaeological perspective, the video corresponds to the synthesizer. So that builds the found footage aesthetics of the film.
It gives us a sense of nostalgia as well as contemporaneity because of, and also I suppose because it's playing with time, it's also suggesting of hybridity as well, different periods. Can I open it up for some questions? Yeah, go on.
Did Leonora Carrington use clear plastic at all in practice, or was that just a choice for the filmmaker?
Sorry, so I missed what?
Did Leonora Carrington use clear plastic at all in her practice, or was that just a choice for the filmmaker?
No, not really, but you have this texture of transparency in her paintings that probably Joshua Piganese is trying to materialize through this recurring motif of plastic. And I guess it's also some kind of metaphor of patriarchal, suffocating relationships, and also in ecological connotation, because she was clearly an eco-feminist.
I like the way it set up a view into a space that you could see but couldn't access, and of course then that's played on, where she thinks she's just going through another plastic screen but can't. And it's another of those, I think it's really well judged in the film, it's another one of those tipping points where you go from the reality bit of surrealism, and without knowing it, you step through a sort of surrealist curtain into, suddenly the rug has been pulled from under your feet. The world isn't working in the way you thought it was. The world is being inflected by a state of mind. So I think it's a sort of surrealist skin, as well as, I guess, just an everyday fact of the packaging, the literal packaging of art as a commodity.
Yeah, it's a kind of narrative device, as a liminal space between subconscious and conscious. Yeah.
Yes,
the plastic. Yeah.
And I think it was also something of an objet trouvé for the director,
Yes.
because when they arrived to start filming at Tate, Liverpool, they noticed that the paintings were being unwrapped from this plastic material, and I think that was then that became a kind of visual sort of metaphor for them to use in different sort of contexts in the storyline. But also it was something that I don't think the director realised this, but the textile millionaire business that Leonora Carrington's father was involved with was actually about man-made synthetic fibres, which connects in some way to the sort of materiality of that substance that goes all the way through the film, and the film finishes with that wrapping sense. And I suppose it is about reality, non-reality. You see through it, it's transparent. You go into perhaps a different world through it. Things are blurred through it. I think also it connects to the visual look of the VHS as well, which is, compared to the kind of pin-sharp imaging now we get through digital, or even the kind of warm tones you used to get from celluloid. VHS and video has that sense of slight blurriness, which I think is also picked up in that material. It just adds another kind of visual dimension and texture to the look of the film.
I think it's really... Yep. Sorry, Roger, I was going to say, I think the camera and the choice of the camera is also really well allied to choice of shot. And I found myself thinking of, not of counter-cinema, but of counter-cinematic film. There's a really brilliant piece written by Peter Wallen, I think maybe even in the 80s now, he's going back some way, but Wallen there is thinking about the ways in which experimental film and counter-cinematic film kind of ignores or eschews the rules, the grammar of standard filmmaking in order to do something new and something different. And part of the disconcerting ambiguity of the film comes from these choice of shots where you see, a bit of a character's head, where in the grammar of standard narrative filmmaking you would see a nice sort of, front on, you'd have a shot, reverse shot, and so on and so forth. So I think the choice of shot is very nicely allied to that, the visuals. And
more on video, I'm just thinking that during the weekend within a conference on intermediality, Thomas Elsiasser in his keynote speech mentioned that the cinematic apparatus, maybe probably more than reading Freud, has helped the surrealists to represent the subconscious. So somehow the cinematic apparatus is a kind of automatic writing. But I would even think that the video medium as an instant signal in an analog regime probably provides even further this kind of automatization and reflection on the subconscious.
I think there's also a trash aesthetic in video as well, which I think they're picking up on. I mean, the decisions are quite deliberate by the director to utilize that form, and also the kind of playing with the horror genre, where it's not really pursued completely. It almost looks amateurish, which I think again is a deliberate strategy by Josh. And yeah, go on. Oh yeah, wait for the mic. Yeah, thank you.
Hi. One thing that struck me was at the beginning monologue when the word artificial was said, and for me that really influenced how I viewed the rest of the film. Do you think it was put there for a reason? And if so, do you think it was portrayed through the use of the plastic or how it's styled? Like, if that makes sense.
I can have a go answering that. What do you think? As I say, I think it's a film that asks you.
I think both, yeah. But also there's that whole thing of a woman in plastic. I think it plays with that especially as well. And how it's kind of shot, I don't know, like you're aware that it's video, you're aware that it's made as opposed to being, immersed in it. You feel like it is artificial, and I don't know, that was a take I had on it.
I think that's really astute. I mean, it's a film about a woman who I think feels painfully self-aware of her own sort of artifice, if you like. She performs herself even with her friendship group. I think as well you're showing there that it's a film that coheres. It doesn't necessarily cohere in the kind of linear, easy sense that maybe straightforward film does, but that you are putting together there, and what you're saying, different bits of the film to produce a coherence. And I think this is one of the marks of, kind of really interesting experimental film, that the different parts of the work speak back to other parts. And so artifice, you've noticed that is, mentioned at the start. It would be easy, I think, for a film of this nature to sort of overstate and then sort of over-explain, but I think it stays the right side of the line. And by the end, I almost wanted it to end, because I thought, it hasn't gone too far, but there's enough of a kind of a resonance at the end that you get the visual rhyme between the bag in the tree and the image of the painting that we've seen all the way through. So there's a coherence there, but I think you're absolutely right. I think artifice of many sorts, the artifice of art, of society, of the kind of the cultural world, certainly of men, but of her own self, I think that's all very much there.
So one there then.
I was just going to say, I think it's
The man in red first.
I think it's interesting that you quoted the Cocteau comment about not being able to handle it, and I think in the sense of the wrapping, the layer in plastic, you can't handle it because it's difficult to get through. But I think it's very clever that there are these layers there, and clearly he knows what he's doing, and having that comment about, you mustn't intellectualise, or you shouldn't intellectualise, he's inviting it very, very fully. And I'm going to sound like a synth geek now, but the fact is that because he's obviously chosen Andy McCluskey to do the music, famously, anybody who knows anything about OMD knows that they were at, I forget exactly where it was in Liverpool, they were there at the last work performance in 75, 76, and it was the kind of connection to OMD, Kraftwerk, Man Machine, the kind of the cold technology as it was, that we now, people who want to get into sort of synths these days want to get hold of the analog, because what was once cold is now seen as very warm, and that the hybrid nature of the music, there's so many layers in there. It's wonderfully kind of beguiling to say you shouldn't intellectualise, but of course we're going to. It's impossible not to be sucked in and find all these layers. So I think it's nice that you prefaced all this with the Cocteau quotation, because it's going to be one of those texts that you go back to and you spot all kinds of things.
It's been released as a single as well, the OMD theme tune as well.
But for me, OMD have always been associated very much with that connection with Kraftwerk, and even actually having the German actor who kind of is interestingly in some senses. There's all kinds of layers here, really, it seems to me, that I guess he's playing with, because it's a short film, but it's incredibly dense, incredibly layered, and that hybridity just invites you in.
Can I bring in your question?
Yes, I have a comment. It's really interesting, rather than a question, to see the potential in terms of location, Liverpool.
Could you just get the mic, sorry, there, so
Yeah,
they
in
can...
terms of Liverpool and London, and I see a lot of potential for the city and Merseyside to develop, especially maybe the ICE will have more involvement in this. But this is my comment. The question is, what sort of time scale and date when some of the shot taken over? I could see some places like Adelphi Hotel and somewhere over there in the city. So what sort of time and date when that being shot and produced? Thank you.
They shot the Tate Liverpool material in 2015, and the London scenes would have been subsequent to that. They shot it over a period of 3 years as they generated some funds along the way. It wasn't all shot in a conventional 6 to 8 weeks shooting period. It was almost assembled over a period of time. And then I suppose you can also see, if you know the locations, you can see that the incident in the room in the Adelphi Hotel is then followed by what looks like Hampstead Heath rather than somewhere in Liverpool. but that's the illusion of cinema. So we accept that. But its production period was over a period of time, which I think then adds to the sense of assembly. And I think he's quite generous as well in saying that when he brought his rough cut to the university in 2017, it was much longer. It wasn't as coherent as a narrative, and he really did benefit from us showing it to the group of people at the symposium, which was probably the most intellectualized group of test screening people you could probably ever get. It wasn't like showing it to a group of teenagers who would tick it. They all communicated back to him, and it certainly we find the approach he was taking. Yeah, there's two there, and then we'll probably have to finish, I think.
Hello. It's interesting because the rough cut that we saw back in 2017, what's been taken out of that is a lot of the narrative. The detective who we saw once, I think, in the film, had a much bigger presence, and they were pursuing the murder investigation, and the missing person investigation, and so it's become much more, of a film of imagery, and much less of a narrative story. That's gone from it, I think, to its benefit.
Yeah. No. And then one at the end.
Mine's just a quick one in regard to the technology used. Is there an age attached to the audience then to appreciate that sort of nuance? I wonder. I'm old enough, I appreciated it. Thank you.
Can we just take one more question, then we probably wrap up in here? Yeah, right at the back, Jack.
And on that note, I enjoyed the humour, particularly towards the end, where the hotel scene and the pint of Guinness, and she kind of asked for can I take a sip? He's like, you want a sip of my beer? It's that kind of play between being very humorous, but at the same time kind of being quite serious, and obviously the scene afterwards where she's beating him with a rock, which again is kind of very deadpan, and this is kind of thin line between what is humorous and what is kind of very serious. Yeah.
I think it's a really important point. Leonora Carrington is one of a very small number of women to have work featured in André Breton's anthology of black humour, and I think it's the debutante, which, correct me if I'm wrong on this, is about a hyena who ends up tearing the face off of, is it a maid? Yeah. It's about a woman who's expected to be a debutante, and there's this kind of violent refusal of this tradition. But it, as I say, Breton thought that there was exactly this kind of deadpan dark humour in there, enough to put it in the anthology. I just wanted to go back to the point about the policeman. I mean, I'm sorry for this actor. I think the thing is brilliantly cast. But the fact that he was there just in that one scene, and he's the voice that says, "Are you sure?" and then disappears, that to me, I know Freud is a bit of a dirty word these days, but that's brilliantly Freudian. It's the moment where the superego comes in and says, "Are you sure that you want to unlock the door on these secret desires?" And then he's gone. So that's really interesting that he was there but has been almost entirely withdrawn, but not entirely.
Then he becomes her projection as opposed to character.
Exactly. The age thing is dead right. I was also thinking of the stuff that Jean-Luc Godard did with Anne-Marie Mieville in the mid-80s, where he was really kind of mucking around with video in a sort of a serious way. I think it does age it, you're right. But somehow I didn't feel that it was old. It sort of made sense in a contemporary setting. The other question about Liverpool, I really realised that I hadn't noticed. It was quite refreshing. There wasn't this sort of Liverpool-London divide. It just sort of merges again surrealistically into one thing. Or if it isn't one thing, I didn't notice the transitions.
Just on the age thing, when the film was shown in Liverpool first time, it was to accompany the 40th anniversary of OMD's first concert. So in terms of aging, that was one of those evenings. We're going to have to call it to an end now, so we can all get a drink and some refreshments outside, and I can get Stephen and Laura to their cab. And I'd just like to thank them both for participating in this discussion with illuminating introductions and great commentaries, and for Stephen coming up for Birmingham and Laura for joining as well. Thank you both.